documentary is an exclusive segment about Tom Bradley, who was the first African-American mayor of Los Angeles. He served 5 terms under unprecedented conditions, and his story reflects his willingness and strength that he endured to overcome racial boundaries and succeed as an effective leader.
In his beginnings, born to poor sharecroppers, Thomas Bradley grew up in Calvert, Texas until the time he was 7 years old. With hardly enough money to survive on, he and his family lived in a small log cabin, all sharing one bedroom. At this time in Los Angeles, it was considered a promised land, providing a better life and an escape from racial segregation. In 1924, the family decided to move to Los Angeles in search of a better life, where his father took a job as a railroad porter and his mother worked as a maid. The Bradleys lived on the east side of Los Angeles, an area now almost entirely Latino, and moved frequently. Unfortunately, the Bradleys' transition into Los Angeles was not what they had hoped. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, non-white minorities were socially and economically segregated in urban ghettos with substandard housing, low-wage employment, high unemployment, and high rates of poverty. In fact, one columnist in the Santa Monica Weekly Interpreter told the local African-American population, "Negroes, we don't want you here, now and forever. This is to be a white man's town." Despite the unfairness and criticisms toward African Americans, Tom Bradley never let anything get in the way of his success. From the times of his elementary days, Bradley strived to achieve in any way that he could. Throughout his schooling, Bradley was the first African American to be elected president of the Boys League. This was an unheard of thing for a black to do in a predominantly white school where, even though there were no strong racial overtones on campus, it was just an understood pattern that these things were off limits to minorities. Bradley also became a member of the National Honor Society, and his accomplishments surely did not end there. Since Bradley was also highly ranked in athletics during high school, it was through both track and football that Bradley came to the attention of UCLA coaches, and he ended up earning a full track scholarship to UCLA in 1937. In his third year at UCLA, Bradley, along with his friends, decided to take the examination for the police department. Shortly after, Bradley got a call that he placed among the top candidates in the police examination, and it was at that point that his priorities skewed away from the university as he showed an increasing determination in the Los Angeles Police Department. While racial discrimination in the LAPD continued until 1964, Bradley had a solid 21 years with the force. In 1961, he was named lieutenant, the highest rank ever held by an African American in LA at that time. During his last years with the force, Bradley began practicing law, which would ultimately account for his involvement with politics. He focused much of his attention toward the Democratic Party when he decided to become president of the United Club. As his achievements continued to augment his status, Bradley sought to run for public office for the 10th Council District. Much of his efforts were geared toward the coalition of blacks, whites, Jews, and Latinos in order to assist him for future campaigns. In 1963, Bradley became the first black elected to the Los Angeles City Council. During this time as councilman, Bradley spoke out against racial segregation within the LAPD and how the Watts riots were handled. This was perhaps what gave Bradley the opportunity to run for mayor. One reporter from the LA Times said that after the riot, Los Angeles was more willing to take a chance on a black man whose dignified personality and police background made him relatively reassuring to whites. Tom Bradley decided to challenge Sam Yorty in 1969 for mayor of Los Angeles. While African Americans were less than 18% of the population, Bradley knew if he had a chance of winning, he needed to reach across racial and ethnic lines and create a strong coalition. Yorty ran an aggressive campaign noted for its racism, exploiting fears and uncertainty. Yorty accused Bradley of being anti-police and asserted a majority of the police force would resign if Bradley were elected. Eventually, Bradley was defeated for the mayor position in 1969 to Sam Yorty. It was a close call, but Bradley's message of hope and change was smothered by Yorty's appeal, and he lost the election.
I decided to run for this office because I was concerned about the direction that we were taking, about the failure to provide programs, the failure to provide leadership, the failure to understand or even to suggest means of dealing with our problems. We cannot tolerate that sense of direction, that sense of drift. It's been bad enough in the past, but Los Angeles cannot any longer survive that kind of leadership.
There is just one issue in this election: race. Yorty is clearly appealing to whites who remember Watts and who fear more black violence. Would Yorty be better at keeping law and order, or Bradley? A white mayor or a black mayor?
In the city of Gary, Indiana, where they have a Negro mayor who came out here campaigning for Mr. Bradley, that they had a session of the city council in which the councilmen were intimidated. They wanted to have a little more power of appointment of human relations commissioners, I believe it was, and the gangs came in and threatened the councilman to the extent that one of them wanted police protection, another said he wasn't psychologically prepared to vote. He was so frightened and upset. You can imagine what would happen here if we had a group of militants descend on our council supporting something of Mr. Bradley if he should be elected.
In 1973, Yorty's same old tired themes of race for once did not work. Voters put aside their fears and handed Tom Bradley a solid victory. Tom Bradley made history as the first African-American mayor of a major U.S. city with a white majority. He was successful because he continued to build upon his transracial coalition.
Well, I think the people have been watching me for 4 years. They're looking at Watergate every day now, and they know what has been happening in government. And I'm confident that as they watch Watergate, they'll make the connection between that and Sam Yorty and the kind of outrageous campaigning that he does. And I would hope that this year in Los Angeles, we finally put an end to this kind of campaigning by scurrilous politicians.
When he's pressed, Yorty has difficulty backing up his charges.
What other evidence do you have to back up this association between Mr. Bradley and the Black Panthers?
I'll tell you something. There wouldn't be anything that would convince you. No matter if he said that he endorsed the Black Panthers, you wouldn't believe it. And so what's it?
Have any other evidence?
Yes, we have plenty of evidence.
Why don't you give it to us right here and now?
I could give you all the evidence, and I've put it out before, of how he's fought the police, and I say that's the link. That he's anti-police, and so are the Black Panthers.
You have no other evidence.
Oh, quit yelling, will you? You guys go out and campaign someplace else, not here.
Tom Bradley made a difference. He opened a city hall and a city's commission to women, minorities, and the disabled. He transformed Los Angeles from a conservative white urban center into one of the most diversified and important cities in the world, with a new skyline, vibrant downtown, and revitalized financial and business districts. In 1989, Bradley broke history, elected to a record 5th-term mayor of Los Angeles.